Tonight on CBC Vancouver News. Assaulted on a transit bus in Abbotsford. The terrifying ordeal all caught on video.
The more you looked, the further you walked, the more death and destruction there was to see.
But now, signs of life. Why marine biologists are optimistic after last summer's deadly heat wave. Plus, their history is controversial. Not so anymore. A look at how the Vancouver special could help solve our housing crisis.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Anita Bathe. We begin tonight with an attack on several passengers on a bus in Abbotsford. 4 people left hurt and shaken after Sunday's fight. A man has now been charged with assault, and part of the attack caught on video. Dan Burrett joins us now with more. Dan, a scary situation for everyone on board.
Yes, and we need to warn everyone, this video may be disturbing to some viewers. It contains violence and a lot of cursing and some offensive language. On the weekend, Abbotsford police say they responded to reports of a drunk assaultive passenger on a bus heading west on Highway 1 at Watcombe Road. It's not exactly clear what led up to this confrontation, but here is what part of the suspect said beforehand.
If I was a wife beat woman chick hit a long time ago and walked out of here like a little, like most women I knew what chicks are. I don't hit chicks. I would never do that, regardless of what you said to me. If your boyfriend was here saying shit, it would have been a whole different story. Shut your mouth and deal with your own business, man. I was arguing with this guy, not you.
The video is about 10 minutes long and tension bubbles right until the end. The person who recorded it asked that we not identify them for their safety, and CBC News has agreed. She claims his comments were racist.
He kept saying to them, you know, I'm not being racist, but yeah, your girl's not bad looking for an Indian woman, things like that. And it was just really offensively rude.
But things eventually moved from insults to violence, and again, some viewers may find this hard to watch.
Everybody! Go! Back off! No!
Hey, man, he's fine now! Get his leg! Get his leg! I can't even see. Everybody at once! If you don't do this, he's gonna the out of someone. You guy, get over here! You guys need to get on his legs! This is a joke!
You can see the suspect punches another person, swears as other people yell and grab at him. Eventually, other passengers jump on him and try to hold him down. You can hear somebody imploring others to grab hold of his legs, fearing he may attack others. The person who took the video claims the suspect hit several men and elbowed an older woman. Police say when they arrived, the suspect kept resisting, so more officers were called in to take him away. The force says 4 people were assaulted, but their injuries are considered minor. As for any racial motivation, police say this.
All the evidence, whether it's racial comments or inappropriate stuff, violent nature assaults or any type of assaults will be reviewed, and that evidence will be forwarded to the courts. And ultimately, it's the court system that decides through Crown Counsel what charges are laid.
The police say 45-year-old David Allen Lucas of Surrey is now charged with assault with a weapon and 3 counts of assault. He's been released with several conditions, and a cursory court search shows a man with the same name and approximate age with a lengthy criminal history with the courts, including several charges against him of theft. Anita.
Dan Burrett live for us tonight. Thank you, Dan. Well, the bruises are still easy to spot on the face of a Richmond teen nervously returning to school. She was beaten and, as a result, concussed and unconscious on the floor of a school hallway just days ago. The 14-year-old says the attacker also used racist and homophobic language. Valpuri has more on what's being done by officials at Hugh Boyd Secondary and by police.
All the markings of an attack are etched in her skin.
I wasn't able to see anything, but I remember hearing that they were telling me that I was bleeding and stuff.
Janice Shia was beaten, bruised, and left unconscious, she says, by a 17-year-old male, another student at her school, the friend of a friend.
He called me a homophobic slur. He called me the F slur, and then he said all Asians are ugly and that he hates all Asians.
The 14-year-old was repeatedly punched and kicked.
Freaked out.
definitely freaked out.
It was a startling phone call for Janice's parents.
As soon as my wife saw the ambulance in the parking lot, she ran towards the door, just jumped out of the car. It didn't even park.
I'm sure any parent who have kids, they don't want this to happen.
The attack happened during lunchtime, inside the school, in a busy hallway in front of the main office.
The motive is merely a guess.
He thought I was telling people that he likes another girl.
The school board says racism and discrimination aren't tolerated in the district but refuse to be interviewed. BC's Minister of Education says all students deserve to be welcomed, included and respected in a safe learning environment while being fully and completely themselves. No student should be excluded or bullied because of their race, sexual orientation or gender identity. The RCMP says a grade 11 male was arrested and released to a legal guardian at the scene. An investigation is underway. Janice is still recovering from her injuries, including a concussion. Support from her friends has been important.
They all comforted me, and they were talking like, oh, I can stay with you the whole day if you want, and that they'll walk me to class, and that they'll just stick by my side.
Going back to school and classes, she says, is a scary thought. Belle Puri, CBC News, Vancouver.
A body has been found after a fire at a Surrey homeless encampment. Firefighters found the body at the camp near 120th Street and 88th Avenue yesterday morning. The victim has not been named. RCMP, Surrey Fire, and the BC Coroner Service are investigating. Anyone with information is asked to contact police or Crime Stoppers. Well, federal food officials have confirmed more cases of avian flu in BC. A small backyard poultry flock in Kelowna tested positive. The property has been quarantined and all other producers within 12 kilometers have been warned. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency says a sample from a bald eagle in Delta also tested positive. And last week, the disease was found at a farm in Enderby. BC's Agriculture Minister is working with the CFIA to try to limit the spread of the virus. Owners of all small or backyard flocks are asked to watch their birds and regularly clean their coops. Vancouver City Council will be considering a motion shortly for more CCTV cameras in public spaces to help deter violent crime. The motion suggests facial recognition technology can help prevent crime in the downtown core. Council debated the issue in 2018, but concluded it wouldn't be able to conduct regular surveillance while complying with BC's privacy laws. Councillor Melissa DeGenova filed the motion, saying that violent crime has increased. A vote is expected this evening. Canada Post says carriers will once again be delivering mail to Vancouver's downtown east side after stopping service over safety concerns. The update comes the same day of a rally calling for the urgent return of service.
Bring back our mail!
Delivery had stopped on 2 blocks of East Hastings for 5 weeks. Now Canada Post is returning delivery on a temporary basis starting this week. It's still unclear how long this temporary return will last, and advocates fear this essential service may stop once again.
It's unconscionable. Mail is a human right. People are waiting for their welfare checks. They're waiting for disability checks. They're waiting for letters from home. They're waiting for essential goods to come to their place, and they can't make it the 14 blocks they're being forced to go to pick it up.
Just give us our mail. Yeah. So we can heal.
Since March 23rd, residents have had to pick up their mail more than 2 kilometers away. Canada Post has not said exactly what set off the suspension of service, other than to say it has safety concerns for its carriers. Well, Surrey Council has voted on a controversial amendment to stop the work of its ethics commissioner. The move is despite BC's ombudsperson urging council not to.
That's a real concern for the public. And I think they have to ask themselves, what are they trying to hide? Why do we close down the ability of the public to have access to the ethics commissioner 6 months ahead of an election? It makes no sense at all.
Lockie and another councillor voted against the motion, with the majority of the Safe Surrey coalition in favour. The move stops the commissioner from processing any new complaints lodged against council members until after the next civic election. The city is also in BC Supreme Court today over a challenge to its controversial bylaw banning political signs on private or public property. Well, a federal court judge has set aside a Department of Fisheries order that would have phased out fish farming in the Discovery Islands. The judge said the order made late in 2020 by then Fisheries Minister Bernadette Jordan breaches the right to procedural fairness owed to the 19 fish farms expected to be shut down by the end of June. Fish farm operators applied for a judicial review of the order that had stopped them from restocking their farms. There are some signs of optimism for BC's marine life tonight after last summer's deadly heat wave. It's estimated billions of sea creatures died, cooked to death inside their shells as water temperatures reached stunning levels. As the CBC's Michelle Gussoub reports, researchers say early indications show things are looking good.
At 4 o'clock, the tide at Kitsilano Beach retreats, revealing what survived the devastating heat and what didn't.
This time last year, this was covered in seaweeds, and then the mussel bed was down here, and some of those mussels did make it through.
Marine biologist Chris Harley among the first to warn of a mass die-off on BC's shores.
If you walk down here at the height of the heat dome in Vancouver last summer, when temperatures were above 40 degrees Celsius, you could smell the stench of billions of sea creatures cooking to death inside their shells.
10 months later, it's time to find out what is coming back and what isn't. The before and after pictures are stark.
There are some reasons for optimism. Seeing the wee little juvenile animals coming in is a good sign, but the system has been disrupted, so that sort of cool, wet seaweed blanket that would protect them on a hot day is not here right now. Yeah, so this is the fun here.
Creatures like crabs that scuttled to shade fared better than the shellfish attached to south-facing rocks. They're coming back, but another heat wave could be catastrophic.
Mussels and barnacles are important filters, right? They filter out a lot of the gunk in the water. What would False Creek look like if we lost those filters? There are questions that we hadn't even thought to ask prior to last summer because we weren't expecting this sort of thing to happen this quickly.
The effects of climate change on the oceans not isolated to the beaches. UBC's William Chung analyzed 340 menus from Vancouver restaurants from 1880 to 2021 to see how the changing climate is affecting the seafood we eat.
And we find a significant increase in the temperature of the seafood that the restaurants are serving since the 1980s. And one of the interesting things is that that increase relates closely to the changes in seawater temperature.
Chung says you can expect to see less sockeye salmon on menus and more warm water species like Humboldt squid, sardines, and oysters.
I expect in another 5, 10, 15 years, this is going to be, instead of a mussel-dominated shore with some of the plants and animals we're used to, it's going to be more of an oyster-dominated shore. And it might actually look like subtropical parts of East Asia at that point. We'll see.
The sights, smells, and tastes of a summer on BC's coast changing in front of our eyes. Michelle Gussoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe joins us now. Good news for sure, and just some stunning shots that they got there on that makes you realize how much life there really is out there and how important it is.
Yes, I loved Michelle's story just then, and I remember during the heat dome, scientists were worried in those days what that was doing to the marine life. So amazing how quickly we can turn around those scientific studies. We are not feeling the same way we were feeling 1 year ago. Anita, I was looking back at pictures, and April 19th, I got the kiddie pool out on the front lawn for the toddler. We are not thinking about that this year yet, but the sun has just really come out in full force. It does feel good when we do get it. Let me show you the current temperatures across Metro Vancouver. 12 in through YVR. Take note of what that 12 feels like today. That is very much our forecast for the next few days and possibly beyond. And that is a good 3 degrees below our seasonal, our 1981 to 2010 seasonal anyway. The culprit this time, which has been the same story all spring, a high level cold low, and the center of it is spinning over Haida Gwaii. The reach of this low is quite large. The counterclockwise flow that it's captured extends all the way into Alberta. Those rain showers you can see on the radar, that's being directed by the Haida Gwaii low. Now it's going to lose its punch over the next couple of days, so I do think we'll see more sunshine for Wednesday and Thursday. I can't guarantee a warm up though, and we do have showers returning for the end of the week, but I know we were all hoping for a start to May that was at least seasonal, and I think we can still do that. So, Anita, I'll take you through the long range coming up.
Okay, but I'll keep the kiddie pool away for now. Thanks,
Not
Jim.
yet. Me too. No problem.
Well, Vancouver musician Susan Jacks of the Poppy family has died. With her partner, Terry Jacks, they had hits in Canada and the U.S. with songs like 60s staple, Beyond the Clouds. Their album, Which Way You Goin' Billy, made it to #2 on the Billboard charts. It became the first Vancouver record to sell 1 million copies. Susan Jacks eventually remarried and moved to Nashville, and even through years of kidney trouble, she never stopped singing. Jacks died yesterday at 73. Okay, the world's greatest athlete is Canadian, if you needed a reminder, and he's coming to British Columbia.
He has broken 9,000 points and created history for Canada.
Damian Warner won gold in the decathlon at last year's Tokyo Olympics, earning the title of the globe's greatest athlete. He was also Canada's flag bearer at the closing ceremony. Now, organizers say he will bring his talents to the Harry Jerome Track Classic in Burnaby in mid-June, competing in several events. A full field of athletes will take part, and fans will be back in the stands after the pandemic kept them away for 2 years. Warner is then expected to compete at the World Athletics Championships in Oregon in July. The Vancouver Special. Some people love it, others not so much. But could the iconic rectangular house hold the secret to affordability? That's next. Welcome to our commercial-free live stream, and thanks for sticking with us. If you step into a nightclub in Toronto, Montreal, and Calgary, chances are you will dance to Afro beats. It's music that originated from West Africa, and it has taken the world by storm. Here in Canada, more and more DJs are getting in on that action. Take a look.
What it really is a celebration.
Dance and music are one.
Whenever even I build a set, I just love to pick music that are gonna make people dance.
Music it's universal. It's a unifier.
What got me into DJing is my love of dance and music. It's completely natural to me. I was making mixtapes when I was 10, and I play instruments, so it's just a natural extension, really, of myself.
I just love music, so I just got I have like a mini piano, and I play with it. I have like a drum pack, I just play with it. So I think it's just like any form of arts, you just go for it.
Over the pandemic, we didn't have clubs, we didn't have sound systems, but what we did have was Instagram Live and ultimately Twitch.
It really goes to show you how small the world is. We're all at home, staring at our screens and not being able to DJ, play music, or entertain anyone. And a huge part of it then was to actually uplift people during the pandemic.
Truly, within a week, we were moving with live streaming. We started with ourselves and 2 other colleagues, right? Then we started reaching out to DJs in the city and then in the country. Then we started reaching out to DJs globally. Suddenly, something that was local suddenly became international because there are no borders on the internet.
We will always curate 4 DJs that typically play a different type of subgenre of Afrocentric music. We had DJs from as far as Brazil to Australia and everywhere in between. So it even makes it that much special that we're able to host them online, and now we're having them here live in person in Calgary. It's truly magical.
What's the difference between live and online? I think that it's just, for me, it's really the people. I want to connect with the audience. I want to feel like, you have a direct feedback with the people, to see them also, not through the screen, but actually to see them in front of you and to see people dance.
When I'm DJing, I'm not looking down. I'm looking around at the dancers. I see how they react. I feed off of that and give to them. They give back to me. I'm an intermediary, in a sense, between the artists and the dancers.
Well, it's long been said they are a blight on the urban landscape. The Vancouver Special. Thousands are sprinkled throughout the city, but the design was so controversial, it ended up being banned. Now, there are questions around whether it could be a recipe to solve our housing crisis. Yute Lee takes a look in his latest About Here.
I want to talk about this house. Well, not this specific house. There are literally thousands of these houses across the city of Vancouver. This one house, it's called the Vancouver Special, and once you notice one of them, you can't stop seeing them. There's one, there's another one, there's a group of them, a red one, a green one, a blue one. So how does a city end up with so many copies of one specific house? Well, I think the answer might offer some lessons for Canada's housing crisis. Our story begins in the 1960s. The city of Vancouver was experiencing a boom in immigration and housing in the city was running out. People needed homes and fast. Enter Larry Cudney, a local draftsman and a guy who apparently hated taking photos because I can't find one of him literally anywhere. He created a design for a house that would eventually become known as the Vancouver Special. It was simple and cheap to build. Its key feature, a low-pitched roof, meant you used fewer materials compared to a steeper roof. But the Vancouver Special wasn't just cheap, it also exploited a loophole, and that was because of its first floor. At the time, if you wanted to construct a house, there were rules that limited the size of your building by limiting how much square footage you could build. But the loophole? Back then, your basement was not included in that square footage calculation, and the definition of basement was a bit ambiguous. The first floor of the Vancouver Special was 18 inches below the ground, and for the city's lawmakers, that was enough to call it a basement. So the entire first floor of this house was technically off the books. This was a huge advantage. You could, of course, build a much bigger house, but also this so-called basement often ended up being used as a whole new unit of housing. You could have two separate families living under one roof. Now, at the time, this was technically illegal. The city's rules stipulated that a house could only have one family, no more. But with this basement, the Vancouver Special helped people circumvent these rules. On paper, this was a one-unit house, even though it was often a two-unit house in practice. A one-unit house on the streets and a two-unit house in the sheets. Okay. This made the Vancouver Special perfect for many aspiring homeowners. For immigrants with relatives, they could house their extended family on the first floor. For working-class residents, they could rent out that floor and use that income to pay their mortgage. For these groups, the Vancouver Special became very popular. And that leads to the final reason for why we built so many of these houses: economies of scale. As more and more Vancouver Specials were built, it became just way easier to build them. The materials became standard in the construction industry, and city staff began to recognize the design and improve it for construction more quickly. In fact, it's been reported that you could get the plans for a Vancouver Special from Larry for $65 and have it approved and built in about 3 weeks. In the middle of a housing shortage, the Vancouver Special provided affordable housing for the people who really needed it. It provided the most house for your buck, with an extra unit of housing. And it was really, really easy to build. And boy did we build them. Around 10,000 Vancouver Specials were constructed between 1965 to 1985. And while the Vancouver Special is an exceptional example, it certainly isn't alone. Most places have a specific house design that can be found all over the city. These repetitive designs exist for a simple reason. The easiest way to build a lot of housing really fast is to build the same house over and over and over again. To me, this story feels relevant right now. Many cities today find themselves with a shortage of housing. And part of the reason why is because building new housing is very difficult. Like the past, there are rules that limit how much you can build on a piece of property, often called zoning bylaws. And in many cities, most neighborhoods only allow for houses to be built in them. These are known as single-family neighborhoods, and they usually make up the majority of land in North American cities. Now, you can actually apply to build something larger than a house in a single-family neighborhood through a process called rezoning. But that's where things get a lot more complicated. Rezoning typically requires multiple applications, reports, consulting firm, council meetings, public hearings, and expertise of planning law, tons of money, and oh yeah, about 2 years. But even with all that effort, there is still no guarantee that you will even be successful. Your application could be denied. Rezoning is a slow, complicated, and risky process. Now, these rules and processes exist for a simple reason. Very few people in single-family neighborhoods want a high-rise or something more disruptive built next to their home. But the problem is that these rules end up stifling any changes to these areas. For example, the application process for this co-housing development in East Vancouver took 2 years. Not the construction, the application process. When building new housing is this difficult, the usual result is that no new housing gets built at all. So that gets me thinking, what if we had a new Vancouver special? A building that's cheap to build, houses more people, and is quickly approved for construction in all these single-family neighborhoods. Well, there's actually something like that happening already. In 2018, the city of Kelowna held a competition for designs that could fit multiple units of housing on properties within single-family neighborhoods. The winning designs for a quadplex were given a fast-tracked approval process. Normally, this kind of building would take over a year to approve in these neighborhoods, but with these designs, you could start building in 2 to 3 weeks. In the past 2 years, over 200 of these quadplexes have been built, creating over 800 new units of housing. I think Kelowna's story is pretty incredible, and one that will likely result in a Kelowna special of sorts. But there is another side to this story that complicates things. At the height of its popularity, the Vancouver Special was perhaps the most hated piece of architecture in the city. Many complained that they were bland, ugly, devoid of architecture, and way too big. But more than anything, many felt that there were simply too many of them. And at the end of the day, the critics got their way. In the 1980s, the city officially made it illegal to build any more Vancouver Specials. Right now, the Kelowna Special is meeting the same fate. As of 2021, these quadplex designs are no longer being approved for construction, a decision that came after concerns that too many of them were being built. This sort of strikes at a tension that I think exists at the heart of the housing crisis. On one hand, most of us do want more housing, but on the other hand, we tend to want it done in a way that doesn't change our communities too drastically. We want new housing to be affordable, but not look too tacky or repetitive. So it's really no surprise to me that the Vancouver Special and other designs like it have been controversial. But there is an interesting twist to this story. In the years following the cancellation of Vancouver Specials, a wave of public sympathy grew around these houses. They were recognized for their role in allowing immigrants and working-class people to build their own housing, despite the criticisms of architecture snobs and social elites. Today, this house is viewed as a valuable part of the city's history. In fact, it has a bit of a cult following. You can find it on t-shirts, posters, cross-stitch art, craft beers, or even consume it in gingerbread form. I think there's an important lesson here. Maybe we don't need to be so concerned about the look of new housing because, frankly, looks are just a small part of why we value things. The Vancouver Special didn't care about being the most beautiful house, it just cared about being the most useful and affordable house for the people building them. And instead of the world ending, we grew to love these houses, for reasons I'm not sure we'll fully understand. But what I do know for sure is that right now, many cities do need more housing, and they need it fast. So I can't help but wonder, maybe it's time for a new special.
36 years after the Chernobyl power plant exploded, CBC News returns to the exclusion zone, where Russian troops until very recently posed a new threat to a precarious situation. We take you to Ukraine next.
we should put it up. Hey, welcome.
It is a big day for Justice Mafoso and fellow members of the Vancouver chapter of the African National Congress. It's voting day, and for these people, the first chance they've ever had to cast a ballot in a South African election.
Just in case they doubt that I'm a South African.
This one is right.
And then I'll pull my original. you can only be a South African to hold a passbook.
In Vancouver, the South African Embassy chose a hotel as a polling booth for the tens of thousands of South Africans living here. Most of the people here are white who have voted in South Africa before, but it seemed the happiest people here are black.
How's it going?
The happiness, though, is short-lived.
It's all crap, you know?
What's going on?
It's all crap. They won't let me vote because I don't have the so-called dumb pass.
Most of these people came to Canada as refugees. Their documents are not being accepted.
The thing is this, we are not allowed to vote, and we are black South Africans. How come? How come are we not? I have all the proper documents simply because I don't have a reference book, so I can't vote. That's ridiculous.
Can we make a provision so that people who have papers like this can be allowed
Well,
to?
the instructions that I were given came from the United Nations. I don't have the authority to change the rules.
The birth certificate and the certificate of baptism, my UN passport.
But if you can ask the white South
papers, they don't allow me to vote.
But if you look here, who's voting, right? White people are voting. Black people are not voting, right?
I think it's absolutely tragic. For just the fact that they're South African, they really should have had the opportunity, and I couldn't imagine anybody turning them down now.
Today, I was supposed to be the happiest man in the world. And unfortunately, my mood has just been dampened like that. And I don't know.
Bob Nixon, CBC News, Vancouver.
The head of the United Nations was in Moscow today, imploring the Russian president to end the invasion of Ukraine. And at the same time, the CBC's Ellen Morrow is looking at a symbol of friendship in Kyiv between the two countries that's being torn down.
A towering bronze statue in the heart of Kyiv, a Russian and Ukrainian worker side by side. This monument was a gift from the Soviet Union in 1982, meant to represent friendship. Today, as Russia's invasion rages on, workers came to tear the statue down. The mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, said this statue, this Soviet symbol, simply could not be in the Ukrainian capital any longer after the horrors of the past 2 months. Klitschko was on site to see the dismantling.
Right now, Russia destroys this friendship, destroyed relationship between two countries. And right now, this monument have total different symbolic.
The teardown comes on another day of fierce fighting in the south and east. This is the aftermath of a strike in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, and signs of the human toll it inflicted. In Mariupol, the steel factory where the last Ukrainian forces in the city remain holed up is under a fresh attack. Mariupol's mayor says a third mass grave has been found near the city. Thousands of people remain trapped in Mariupol, evacuation efforts failing repeatedly over recent days. We've lost absolutely everything, Nina Sherbak says. We don't know what to do or how we will start again. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was in Moscow today, meeting with President Vladimir Putin, imploring him to end the invasion, pleas going unheeded. Earlier, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov refused to acknowledge any Russian wrongdoing after what Guterres described as a frank discussion.
It is my deep conviction that the sooner we end this war, the better for the people of Ukraine, for the people of the Russian Federation, and those far beyond.
Back in Kiev, some were eager to pose with the fallen statue, a symbol of Russia no longer wanted here. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Kiev.
Canada's defense minister has been meeting with other NATO members and allies in Germany. The meeting was called at the request of the U.S. Defense Secretary. About 40 countries discussed ongoing support for Ukraine.
This situation is volatile, and we need to continue as allies to do whatever we can to support Ukraine and its sovereignty, stability, and security.
Anand repeated Canada's pledge to provide more and heavier weapons to Ukrainian forces, and Germany is now offering anti-aircraft systems. There was also an agreement to hold monthly meetings to coordinate the delivery of weapons to Ukraine. Anand will be traveling to Washington for a one-on-one meeting with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin later this week. Well, today marks the 36th anniversary of the devastating nuclear meltdown at the power plant in Chernobyl, Ukraine. The disaster claimed at least 30 lives and turned the region around the plant into a no man's land. As the CBC's David Common tells us, the facility is now in a war zone, and the International Atomic Energy Agency is on scene doing an inspection.
Driving towards Russia pushes through a path of destruction, the remnants of that country's attack, defeat, then retreat. Our destination, Chernobyl. Exactly 36 years ago, the worst nuclear failure ever happened right here. Still dealing with the aftermath of that 1986 disaster, it was the workers here looking out that window who saw a new menace on this very spot. The attack by Russian soldiers would sever Chernobyl from the grid, putting containment of its radioactive risk in danger. It could have led to catastrophic consequence, a second Chernobyl, says Alexei, who did not want his last name used. When the Russians left, they took Alexei's colleagues as prisoners back to Russia. And kilometers from the station, Russian troops dug trenches, disrupting radioactive soil and dust. Dozens of those soldiers said to have become sick.
Hello, hey.
We were there when international nuclear monitors arrived for the first time since the invasion, here to survey the possible consequences of the occupation.
After what happened, and we are working with our Ukrainian colleagues here to restore, to repair, to assess. There's a lot of work.
And he warns the situation is not yet stable in what could have been a catastrophe. The anniversary of the disaster is a somber day here. Many of the dead then, firefighters, those who ultimately saved not just Chernobyl, but the world. Next door to the memorial, the fire station that was surrounded until recently by Russians. They kept flying the Ukrainian flag. One part defiance, one part anger. We know what they did to our peaceful citizens, to our children, to our wives. We just have hate, Colonel Sergei Strelchenko told us. Ukraine has 15 nuclear reactors. Several are worryingly in the path of Russia's current assault. If this level of violence reached any of them, the repercussions could be massive and last for centuries. David Common, CBC News, Chernobyl, Ukraine.
Lviv is a city in western Ukraine in the shadow of the conflict, where tens of thousands have fled to escape fierce fighting. But as Katie Simpson shows us, despite the constant threat of Russian airstrikes, Lviv continues to be a refuge for those who are scrambling to put their lives back together.
The bustling streets of Lviv hide an ache, pulsing just below its picturesque exterior. Ukraine's cultural capital transforming to absorb hundreds of thousands of displaced people. Shelters expand and contract in waves. Weary new arrivals from the east and south often take up space of those deciding to leave the country altogether.
Imagine you have live in your home all your life. You know friends, you have a job, you have some places you love, and now you cannot go back there.
Victoria and her 71-year-old mom, Raisa, fled fighting in the east because Raisa needs brain surgery, and Lviv is the only place to get a surgeon. They sleep on mattresses on the floor next to strangers, mostly other families, in a 117-year-old schoolhouse transformed into a shelter. Svetlana runs the operation, collecting art from the kids who stay here. Hearing about their journeys to this place has been brutal. You know, it's very hard because at the beginning, I came home and cried. Now I calm myself down, she says. Sadness seeps through most everything here, even a Prosecco bar known for its Crimean food. The mood of the people who are visiting our restaurant has changed, says Maria. People asked us if we know places where they can rent an apartment. There are people who asked us where the bomb shelters are, she says. Existing in this excruciating limbo has forced unexpected and unwanted fresh starts. Oksana is an economist who fled Kherson. She's now learning how to cobble leather shoes at a technical college, teaching the displaced. Here I want to have a new specialization because I should earn money in this situation, Oksana says. She too starts to tear up as she talks about her life before the war. And while Lviv has been safer and the people welcoming, it's not home. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Lviv.
Tackling hate speech on social media, why activists are saying the government must do more to crack down on the online problem. And at 6:41, a live look from Hansen Island tonight off the northern coast of Vancouver Island. A spot of sun breaking through the rain clouds, but the name of the game is unsettled. Johanna has a look at your full forecast next.
Unfair question, and I will not answer it. I was known as the spinner because I liked to do a lot of turns whenever I did a fashion show or stuff like that. And my name is Hortense Hodge. I'm an ex-flight attendant, ex-model, was born in Guyana. I was 10 years old when I came here, so it was quite an experience. It was very tough, you know. I had never known what the word N-word was. I didn't learn that until I came to Canada. And as a child, and you're female, you get beaten up, you get treated differently. And I would come home and I watched my mother cry. I watched my father think that he'd made the wrong decision. Started flying, and my flying helped with my modeling, and they sort of went hand in hand. You know, a lot of times you're the only black flight attendant on a flight, and when a young girl comes on who is black with her parents, and she sees you, and that smile that she gives, and the first thing you hear is, "Mommy, she looks just like me." That is unbelievable. everybody knew me as the black model with the short cropped hair and this huge smile. And yet I wanted to look like everybody else who I was modeling with. Because you've got people who were flipping their hair up and people who were wearing different things. You get the feeling that sometimes that people don't see you. Or they say, I understand what it's like. You can't understand, you're not in my skin. You can sit back and say, I know what it's like. Nobody knows what it's like until it happens to you.
When did you become, yes, this is the moment, that moment?
One was working with a designer called Leo Chevalier who did furs and things like that. And I remember him putting me in a fur coat and I just thought, oh my God. What black girl did you ever see wearing a fur coat like this? Like, that blew me away. Like, everybody kept saying to me, you're like this princess. And I kept thinking, yes, I am.
A new report from Canada's environment watchdog shows heavy industrial emitters aren't paying their fair share for the pollution they produce. As David Thurton tells us, this comes as Indigenous and rural communities are facing an undue burden from the price on carbon.
At the pump, many Canadians know about the carbon tax, but there's a cost on carbon for the country's largest emitters as well, which Canada's environment watchdog says isn't high enough.
There's a question of fairness between the Federal Large Emitters Program, the OBPS as it's called, and the carbon levy that everyday Canadians pay.
Canada's Environment Commissioner says the way it's structured is lopsided.
It's not fair for everyday Canadians to shoulder a disproportionate amount of the burden in terms of the carbon levy.
The Commissioner agrees with the government. Carbon pricing is essential for meeting emissions targets. Without it, consumers aren't as likely to drive electric vehicles or ones that run on hydrogen, a fuel that, when burned, emits water. But the Commissioner has issues with how much faith Liberals are putting in hydrogen.
The assumptions in the federal hydrogen strategy are overly optimistic and compromise the credibility of the projected emissions reductions.
The NDP seized on this and other areas in today's reports.
We need to make sure that the polluter actually does pay and that the big companies that are making record profits pay their share.
Canada's Environment Minister says changes for large emitters are coming.
We are in the process of ensuring that the pricing system has more stringency.
But increasing it too much could shift emissions offshore, according to this researcher.
Then there's a risk that those firms aren't going to build a new facility in Canada. They're going to build it somewhere else, or they're going to shift where they're making cement or where they're making steel.
The government says it accepts all of the recommendations from the Environment Commissioner, but while changes are coming, the minister says they won't happen without consultation with the provinces and territories. David Thurton, CBC News, Ottawa.
Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe joins us once again with the forecast. Okay, Joe, so I saw this live shot we had up on our monitor during the commercial break. I lost it because it's so awesome. And so I need you to tell me what's going on here.
I'm so glad that you lost it because it is so dramatic. I mean, we've got these gorgeous bubbling cumulus you can see on the North Shore, but those dark clouds, might I add, literally over Lynn Valley where I am right now. That is a rain shaft that you're looking at. So it is raining down on Lynn Valley eastward. And then you've got some blue sky in the mix as well. Yes, drama, drama, drama. I love it. If you get a chance to look out the window, it's something different for everyone across Metro Vancouver right now. And this is the definition of instability. Let me show you what that looks like from space. Here's our satellite shot. And it is this swirling low and the cold air sitting above a relatively warmer waters that is creating this instability. Perfect environment for thunderstorms. And you can see in the past 3 hours, we've seen a lot of strike across the south coast. We saw some hail come down in Maple Ridge a couple of hours ago, and that's tracking through Chilliwack as we speak, and just gorgeous cumulus as well. Now, unsettled activity in and across much of British Columbia. I just wanted to slide you south of the border, where we have widespread fire danger warnings tonight. Very strong winds and dry conditions fueling dozens of fires this evening south of the border. Situation we're watching closely. Very early in their season, see this kind of burn, and that is really hot and dry conditions. Very different than the kind of spring we've been experiencing north of the border. Wanted to show you a snapshot of the current temperatures this evening. 3 right now in Toronto, and that is coming with some snow. I think we're all wondering coast to coast to coast what our spring is looking like. Just giving you that sneak preview once again from Environment Canada, April, May, and June. And notice the cooler temperatures across BC. This is coinciding with that extension to La Nina, now looking to last through spring and into summer. The good news, of course, this could be good news for our wildfire season and potentially lower chance of heat domes, but things do change quickly out here. 14 for Kelowna tomorrow, and that'll look like a 17 for you at the end of the week. We've got 12s the next few days. We'll see a lot more sun. Yes, it is still quite chilly, 3 degrees below our seasonal high. I think we'll hit it as we head into the back end of the weekend. Notice the unsettled forecast. We'll see some drama. We'll see some sunshine. We won't see record-breaking heat, but maybe that's a good thing for now, Anita.
I think probably so, but drama, I don't know.
I think we can go for more of those live shots, so stay tuned.
For sure. Okay. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
MPs in Ottawa today heard more needs to be done to deal with hate speech on social media platforms. The recent protests in Ottawa by truckers and their use of social media are adding fuel to the pleas. As Rafi Boudjikanian reports, anti-hate groups are calling for a regulator to police the platforms.
It's been weeks now since a convoy of protesters driven primarily by an anti-public health mandate, along with some organizers who wanted to overthrow the federal government, left Ottawa's downtown core.
Freedom, my friends!
But nobody's about to forget those events.
One of the issues at the convoy that happened in Ottawa was these Facebook groups that started up and remained up, quite honestly.
Facebook and Twitter defensive about any possible role their platforms played.
We had a 24/7 monitoring effort during the convoy protests that we set up almost immediately.
There's always 24/7 monitoring on Twitter, and we also get reports, which is wonderful.
Twitter is the social media site capturing the most attention this week after billionaire Elon Musk and the board of the publicly traded company reached a deal. If it's approved, the $44 billion deal will make it privately owned. Musk has criticized the social media giant in the past for failing to protect free speech and also sided with the convoy participants this winter.
I can't speculate on what Mr. Musk will or will not do until that deal closes, which could be months.
The government also cautious about any possible response to a Musk-owned Twitter.
I think it's just something that we need to reflect on and make sure that we, as democracies, there would be proper safeguards.
Safeguards that include pending legislation on online hate, but both civil society groups and tech giants such as Twitter have criticized an existing draft as overbearing and limiting on free speech. The federal government has started rewriting it, but acknowledges a new version could take months. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Ottawa.
It's an effort to turn back the clock on coral reefs. Could we restore dying reefs inside a laboratory? That's next.
So we're in with a fresh load of seal flippers from up on the Northern Peninsula. Oh, it's a big demand. It's the older population, seniors that like the flippers. But we see some young people too. We sell out every year. Flippers do go fast.
Oh, I'm picking up some seal flippers. The first of the season.
Oh, I'm here picking up flippers. I pick up flippers here every year. I've been eating flippers all my life, and my mother showed me how to cook flippers, and I just love them. And I had company down my house, and everybody says, "Winch, boy, you certainly cook some good flippers."
I noticed the fresh flipper sign, and it's my grandfather's favorite food. And since COVID, I guess, there hasn't really been much, so he's been asking me kind of often if I found any. He knows what he likes, and he's like a classic, like traditional Newfoundland cuisine.
From St. John's right up to the Northern Peninsula, all this side of the island, more people eat them because they grew up with them coming in as, you know, when they were younger.
I came into St. John's in the 70s, and since that, I've been coming down here every spring and buying flippers. It's a symbol of the beginning of spring, and it's a tradition, of course, in Newfoundland for many, maybe back to the 17 or 1800s.
Just from talking to people, it seems like the younger generation coming up now, they don't eat flipper, they don't even think about it.
Oh, no. They'd rather have McDonald's or...
I have 3 daughters, and I don't think they care too much about them. No, not really, not as much as the older folk do.
No, I think you should try anything once. I mean, you know, you may like it, you may not, but at least, you know, if you give it a shot, just, you may like it, and if you like it, it's great.
Don't say you don't like it until you try it. Of course, it's got to be cooked right, you know. You got to know how to cook it.
Well, I tell you how to cook them. The first thing, I boil them a bit, and then I do my vegetables. I put all my vegetables in, and then the secret behind it, believe it or not, use a tin of vegetable soup and a tin of tomato soup. Mix all that together in with your vegetables, then put it in on top of your flippers, and I make my own pastry, and I put the pastry over it, and it is fantastic.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
After 7 weeks of online voting and eliminations, the search for BC's best small town is coming to a close. Tune in to the early edition on April 29th to find out who will be crowned BC's best small town. And enjoy the very best of choral music and heavenly harmonies with Corleone on May 12th and 13th. Get tickets and learn more about this special performance at corleone.org.
Coral reefs in Florida and the Caribbean are under growing threat of destruction from disease. It's one that strips coral of its color and eventually its life. In a bid to save a threatened species, scientists have undertaken an ambitious project to restore damaged reefs by breeding coral at a research facility.
Corals are actually animals, and they're symbiotic with algae. So the corals are basically the way you can think of them as is a anemone or a jellyfish that's upside down. These are stony corals, so what they do is they produce a layer of calcium carbonate, which is basically limestone around their base. When these corals transfer eggs and sperm back and forth, they do it a certain time of the month. They want to find out when their other genotypes are doing the same thing. If their timing is off, they're releasing sperm into the water, and there's no eggs that are ready to be fertilized. So basically what we do is we trick the coral into thinking that it's still in the nature. So if the coral is not healthy and doesn't have a surplus of energy, it won't invest in reproduction. So the first thing we had to do is make sure the coral has great conditions to live in. The coral coverage is getting so thin, a lot of these corals release eggs and sperm. They need to cross-fertilize another colony, and they're just too spaced out spatially. there's potential to propagate these corals on a level that you could return some of these corals to the wild. And there's a potential that you could save, the species by doing that.
Incredible stuff science is giving us. Okay, so you'd find the Cirque du Soleil acrobats inside a big tent, but this is flexing their skills a bit differently. Take a look. Performers on the roof of BC Place captured by drone video. The traveling circus calling it a once-in-a-lifetime event to celebrate the return of the arts and live events in BC. Acrobats being tossed into the air, tumbling across the roof, doing somersaults and backflips. They're performers from the show Alegria, which is touring now in Vancouver. Slightly terrifying. I don't think I would ever want to step foot up there, but really cool. And we were talking about drama earlier. I think these performers take the cake, one way to celebrate the return of the arts for sure. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News.